Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the New Mexico Museum of Art's St. Francis Auditorium. It's great to see all of you here. As just a bit of housekeeping, as you may know, the governor did lift the mask mandate for state public buildings. That doesn't mean you have to take your mask off. In fact, if you're comfortable wearing your mask, please continue to do so. But I just wanted to emphasize that it is, at this point, a matter of personal choice. My name is Mark White. I'm the executive director here at the New Mexico Museum of Art. This is, I think, maybe the fourth lecture that we've had in the last 8 months, so it's really fantastic to be able to welcome people back to the auditorium. Just a couple of things that I want to mention before we get to the heart of the program. Next Saturday, so not tomorrow, but a week from Saturday, on March 12th, we'll be opening a new show called Western Eyes, 20th Century Art Here and Now. And we will have another lecture in conjunction with that exhibition on March 25th, which will be led by our curator of 20th Century Art, Christian Wagasback. So 2 really fantastic lectures in March. But let's get to why we all came, which is Ansel Adams' Pure Photography and the lecture by Dr. Rebecca Senf. What I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce the curator for the exhibition, Kate Ware, who will introduce Dr. Senf, but in order to properly introduce Kate, I'd like to offer a little bit of background and bio on her. Kate Ware has served as curator of photography at the New Mexico Museum of Art in Santa Fe, New Mexico since the end of 2008. Kate has had an extensive career in museums, including positions at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the J. Paul Getty Museum, the Oakland Museum, among others. Specializing primarily in American and European photography of the early 20th century, she has organized solo exhibitions on historic figures, including Laszlo Moholy-Nagy and Man Ray. She's written about the history of the Julian Levy Gallery in New York and worked on subjects as diverse as lowriders and environmentalism. She's currently doing research on a subject close to her heart, mixed media photography of the 1960s and 70s. That exhibition, titled Transgressions and Amplifications, Mixed Media Photography of the 1960s and 70s, opens on July 23rd, so please come back and see that exhibit. It's going to be fantastic. So please join me in welcoming Kate Ware.
Welcome, welcome. It's so wonderful to see you all on this windy, windy night. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rebecca Senf, Chief Curator at the Center for Creative Photography at the University of Arizona in Tucson. For those of you who may not know it, the Center, or CCP as it's commonly called, is one of the premier places for the study of photography. And one of its founders in 1975 was none other than Ansel Adams. During her tenure at CCP, and in a joint appointment at the Phoenix Art Museum, Senf has organized numerous exhibitions on historical and contemporary photography, as well as publishing books and essays on artists including Mark Klett, Betsy Schneider, David Taylor, and, of greatest interest to us tonight, Ansel Adams. As some of you may remember the lovely exhibition of William Cliff's photographs that was shown here in 2013, and that's something that she organized, Shiprock and Mont Saint-Michel photographs by William Cliff. So we've had opportunities to work together over the years. Senf earned her PhD in art history from Boston University and worked concurrently at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, where she co-wrote the catalog for the exhibition Ansel Adams from the Lane Collection, while working on her dissertation on Adams' early work, which forms the foundation of her recent publication, Making a Photographer, the early work of Ansel Adams. For those of you itching to get a copy of the new book, you can find it in our museum shop just across the lobby. Liz and Catherine are there to help you with that, and Becky would be happy to sign a book for you. There's also a book signing tomorrow at Obscura Gallery at 1 o'clock over on Paseo de Peralta. where some of Adams' work is also on view. And you might also be interested in connecting with the Scheinbaum and Russick studio, who have some Adams photographs on view. It was in Boston that I first met Becky at a photo conference at Boston University. And I think we also both ended up piled into somebody's van or SUV for a road trip to Mass MoCA, which was still fairly new at that time, the contemporary art space in northern Massachusetts. So it was wonderful news when Becky returned to her native Tucson in 2007 to work at CCP, and I arrived in Santa Fe the following year in 2008, as Mark said. She's a dynamic and generous colleague, and I'm grateful to her for taking the time to share her insights into Ansel Adams photographs. On view on the second floor in our galleries here is the exhibition Ansel Adams, Pure Photography, which is on view through May 22nd. So I encourage you to see the show. And in case you're interested in another view of photography from the time of Adams, our curator of 20th century art, Christian Wagesbach, will be giving a virtual talk on April 28th about William Mortensen. And he and Adams had a pitched battle in the press about what photography should be. So thank you for being here, and let's welcome Rebecca Senf.
All right, so nice to see you all. It is really, it's very hard for us curators to be separated from our audiences the way we've been for the past couple of years, and it's really nice to be coming back into spaces where we can see the people that we do our work for. So I'm really glad to have you here. So tonight I'm going to talk about my new publication called Making a Photographer, the Early Work of Ansel Adams. This is an image of the book cover. And I'll come back around and talk a little bit about that cover design towards the end. But what I'm going to do tonight is talk about the basic premise of the book. I'm going to read a piece out of the book to give you a sense of some of the arguments that I make. Then we're going to talk through some of those chapters of the book, and then at the end, I'm going to read another short passage. After that, I'm happy to take questions, and then as Kate said, if anyone has a book they'd like me to sign, I'd be happy to do that as well. So the basic premise of the book and my work was to try and understand how it is that Ansel Adams goes from making pictures like the one on the left, which is dated from around 1920, to making pictures like the one on the right. And there's a gorgeous print of this horizontal aspens from 1958 in the exhibition upstairs, which I encourage you to see. So how is it that Adams is making pictures like the one on the left that are small, show a very intimate view of nature, they're low contrast, they really take advantage of the middle tones of the photographic paper? He begins there. How is it that he gets to making pictures like the one on the right-hand side that to those of us who know Ansel Adams photographs feels like a signature Ansel Adams or a characteristic Ansel Adams? So I knew that there was this big difference from his early work to his later work. What I wanted to figure out is how he got from point A to point B, and why did he go from point A to point B. So one of the things that I had to do as a scholar in thinking about Ansel Adams and writing this book was define what that signature style is. How do we know when we look at a photograph that it's by Ansel Adams? And interestingly, no one had ever really written that. No one had ever defined what it is that makes an Ansel Adams picture so characteristically look like an Ansel Adams picture. So I'm going to use this photograph, the Tetons and the Snake River, from the Grand Teton National Park. It dates from 1942, as an example to talk through what those characteristic elements of a signature Ansel Adams are. And so I'm going to talk about the way in which he made these photographs in order to engage us emotionally and to persuade us. That was his goal with these photographs, and he uses a number of characteristics to achieve that. One of them is a panoramic view of the landscape. So he's pulled way back from the subject of the picture so that you get a sense of the sweeping qualities of the landscape. Another is the omniscient viewpoint that he uses, the idea that he's choosing a godlike position to photograph the scene from, to give it a kind of authority. Another is the use of light and weather effects to give it a sense of drama and temporality. And then also his use of a wide range of gray tones. And when I'm talking to some more general audiences, I might not use the term zone system, but I suspect that some of you out there are familiar with the term zone system. So this range of gray tones comes from Adams's use of a method called the zone system. And so he uses all of these characteristics to create a picture that has a sense of grandeur. It invokes a sense of awe in the viewer. So I'm going to read now a short passage that will give us a sense of that signature style. Using the Tetons in the Snake River as an example, it is possible to describe these stylistic elements that Adams brought together to support his communicative goal. This photograph visually expresses the transformative potential of experiences in nature and the value of wilderness as an intrinsic good. In sum, it presents a heroic vision of the American wilderness as an invaluable asset to its citizens. Adams chose a vantage point that facilitated a panoramic view of the Teton Mountain Range with the winding Snake River. The picture includes a swath of cloud-filled sky and distant mountains with patches of bright snow. In the mid-range, the silvery river curves through tree-covered banks. With little immediate foreground, Adams created a perspective that suggests his omniscient grasp of the scene, and as such implies that what is presented is made from the ideal position and is the best, or perhaps the only, way that this particular vista should be seen. It is a stylistic choice that imparts authority and gravity to the picture and confers importance on the subject. Adams favored landscape views that featured visible weather, such as snowstorms, billowing clouds, and rain. In some instances, his photographs include a wide band of sky to accommodate clouds, emphasizing an atmospheric expanse. In other cases, clouds and mist appear around landforms, creating depth within the three-dimensional space and helping to define and shape the appearance of the land itself, as with this image, Clearing Winter Storm. One advantage of weather for Adams was its ephemeral nature. Clouds, rain, and snow are all temporal elements, and they impart a sense of transience and motion to Adams's necessarily still frames. In the Tetons in the Snake River, the sky glows behind dark storm clouds, and the left-hand portion of the mountains is bathed in sunlight, as is the surface of Snake River, causing it to shimmer within the darker surrounding territory. Because of the changeability of the light and weather depicted, the viewer is aware that the scene Adams captured must not have looked like this for long, and indeed will never look exactly like this again. Thus, the viewer can both appreciate the magical qualities of spectacular clouds and illuminating rays as inspiring features of the natural world, and also attribute to Adams the ability to perceive and record just the right moment when the scene offered this exquisite combination of visual effects. A key component of Adams's mature style is an operatic treatment of his subject, a desire to heighten the dramatic qualities of the scene and create a photographic work of art that is both widely comprehensible and spectacular. In some instances, it is achieved by his use of viewpoint. At other times, it is lighter weather effects that convey that engaging sense of drama. In some pictures, such as the Tetons and the Snake River, it is the use of powerful shifts in contrast, glittering passages of light interspersed with or appearing alongside areas of dense shadow or darkness. Adams's use of heightened contrast gives his images an engaging forcefulness, making his artworks bold and serious. The perception that the landscape is imbued with drama creates an expectation that the situation is not static and that viewers are observing a fleeting moment within an evolving situation. Adams's use of operatic and awe-inspiring qualities in his prints plays upon the expectations of viewers. The Tetons and the Snake River as a work of photographic art is impactful because the actual scene, when observed by a typical national park tourist, does not look like it does in Adams's picture. His complete set of skills in making the negative and the print coalesce to create an artwork that surpasses people's real-life experience, presenting an idealized, heroic version of what really exists, but one still rooted in the appearance of the scene. In so doing, Adams's artworks convey not what he saw, but what he felt. Perhaps more importantly, they convey what Adams hoped his viewers would feel when faced with these landscapes that were deeply meaningful and inspiring to him. Okay, so the book starts with Ansel Adams as a boy. Here he is at about the age of 14 in 1916. He was born in 1902, and he was given that year a copy of James Mason Hutchings' book, In the Heart of the Sierras, and it was a tale about the discovery, I'm using air quotes, discovery of Yosemite by white people, because of course indigenous people were already living there, and the battles and the skirmishes that happened and the conquest of Yosemite by the Mariposa Battalion. Adams was so intrigued by the descriptions of this place that he begged his parents to take him there for their summer vacation that year. He was an only child. His parents were very doting, and so they acquiesced, and that summer they went to Yosemite. This is Adams posing with his box Brownie camera. It's a very rudimentary type of camera, really is truly a box with an opening in the front and a roll of film inside that you can advance. And so Adams went on this family vacation to Yosemite as a child and made his first photographs in Yosemite National Park. At the Center for Creative Photography at the University of Arizona in Tucson, we have the album that Adams made of those first childhood pictures. So you're seeing a page here from that album. It's one of the very precious things that's part of the Ansel Adams archive, and I talk about it in the first chapter of my book as a great example of where Adams begins. It gives us a chance to see him at the very, very start of making photographs. And these were made with the box Brownie camera. They were developed at the photo finisher right there in Yosemite National Park. So they're the equivalent of drugstore prints. They're small, glossy prints. You can see they all have a white border. He glued them into this album, and interestingly, not in the order of the trip. So it's not really a trip account, but rather according to the geological formations within Yosemite Valley. So you can see here the page is labeled Half Dome. He's gathered 5 pictures that he made of Half Dome. The next page in the album is 5 more pictures of Half Dome. So he, although he'd made them all on different dates, was gathering them together so that he could compare, so that his viewers could compare all the pictures he'd made. So it's interesting that he organized it that way, but I also like seeing him, even at the very beginning, experimenting with things like composition, with framing. You can see the middlemost picture, he's got Half Dome backlit. You can see him move Half Dome around the frame. So in the lower right picture, you can see Half Dome sinks to the lower right corner of the picture, whereas in the upper left corner of this page, you can see that he's got Half Dome all the way to the right edge of the picture. So he's already thinking about what can he do with the camera, what control does he have about how the picture looks. His experience that first summer was really that of a tourist. These are pages of a letter that he wrote to his Aunt Mary, who was the one who gave him that copy of James Mason Hutchings' book, In the Heart of the Sierras. And here he is as a 14-year-old writing back to his aunt. And I want to read you just a little bit of it. His handwriting is a little tricky, and I don't know if at the distance you all are, you can see it. But I'm going to start reading from right here. A couple of days ago, we went to Mirror Lake to see the sunrise. We then took the North Dome Trail up the Tenaya Canyon. It is a 21-mile trail, and we had the pleasure of walking about 1/4 of it. About 4 or 5 days ago, I went to the top of Yosemite Falls and Yosemite Point. I came back on fast time, covering 5 miles in 1 hour and 5 minutes. I have taken more than 85 good pictures. I have learned to swim and play pool and croquet. We expect to go to Glacier Point on Wednesday, either by the 11-mile trail or the Ledge Trail. We will go on the former on horses. Hoping that you are well and expecting to hear from you soon, I am Ansel Adams. Isn't that sweet? So here he is writing to his aunt back home in San Francisco and telling her about his adventures in Yosemite. And it's notable, he's not really thinking that much yet about the wilderness. He's a boy, so he's thinking about the things he's learned. He's counting how many miles he's covering and how many trails, how many pictures he's made. And so this is very much a tourist experience. So then the next chapter of the book talks about how that experience really changes and deepens over the next 10 years. So Adams was so entranced with Yosemite after that initial trip that there's never a year for the rest of his life that he does not go back to Yosemite. And so each of the next 10 years, he goes back and has deepening experiences with the wilderness. He begins to meet mentors who take him on backpacking trips, or as you can see here, sometimes they had the benefit of a mule. These are, the mule is carrying, in this case, Adams's camera equipment. So those 2 giant boxes on the mule are carrying Adams's wooden camera and his glass plates. So he's literally going into the high country of the Yosemite backwoods with glass plate negatives to make his photographs. You can see him there leaning on the tripod. He's got his pants tucked into his high socks to keep the mosquitoes away. And there's a great little quote from a letter where he's writing to his dad about this mule. The mule's named Mistletoe. And he says to his dad, "As I've said before, he will be indispensable when long trips are considered, and we will then be able to pack a more enjoyable amount and variety of provisions and take greater pleasure out of our meals. More milk, more canned fruit, more everything than if we packed on our backs." So his dad forwarded him the money for the mule. But through this process of working with various mentors and being out on these extended trips, Adams's understanding of what the wilderness is changes really dramatically. He goes from a tourist experience to having a much more, a slower experience. He's out with people who are teaching him about botany, about bird watching, about geology and geography. He's interacting with the Sierra Club and then becomes a member. So he's learning about the history of the Sierra Club and John Muir, the way that the various peaks in the high country got their names because of the people who first summited them, again, the first white people to have summited them. And so he's learning a much slower and much more kind of intellectual way of engaging with the wilderness rather than it being recreational as it was when he initially came. And we see his photography change over that period of time as well. This person, Albert Bender, was an important patron to Ansel Adams. And early in Adams's, he was in his mid-20s when he met Albert Bender. And Albert Bender offered to help Adams create a product, a portfolio of his early mountain pictures. And so Bender was going to forward Adams some money. He connected him to a publisher who helped him design the portfolio. And then Albert Bender got on the phone and called his friends and said, "I'm going to buy 10 of these portfolios. I think you should buy 10 of them too." And so within a few weeks, they had sold a number of the portfolios, allowing Ansel Adams to have an income from his photography for the first time. This picture is by Consuela Canaga of Albert Bender, who was very important in the arts patronage in San Francisco. So the pictures that Adams is putting in this first portfolio look like this. This is one of them, of Kearsarge Pinnacles. They're mountain pictures, but again, very different than what we would consider a signature picture by Ansel Adams. They're much more subtle, they're more intimate, there's much less drama. We don't see weather here. We don't have that omniscient viewpoint. Adams is in an in-between phase. In her exhibition, Kate Ware talks about this transition Adams makes from a more pictorialist mode of photography into pure or straight photography, where you have things in sharp focus and you have great depth of field and you're using a glossy paper. So Adams is beginning at this moment to think about modernist composition. So we're seeing him create photographs that are very interested in formal issues, like the shapes. Do you see how the shape of the tree on the left and that V-shaped notch on the left side mimics the V-shaped notch in the mountains on the right-hand side? The way he's layering and flattening the trees in the foreground against the mountains in the background. He's really interested in all the shades of gray that he's able to see in this view of mountains, waters, and trees. So he's thinking about formal elements, but he is still using a matte surfaced paper to create these photographs. And in fact, it's an uncoated paper. So here you're seeing that same print out of its folder, and I intentionally layered it like this on top of the colophon for an illustration in the book so that you can see just how translucent that paper is. I'm actually seeing some nodding heads. So you can see that darker paper through the photograph because it's such thin paper. So Adams was really interested in experimenting with papers in this earlier phase. Obviously, later on, he goes to a pretty neutral, black and white, glossy photographic paper. That's what we expect when we think about his signature style. I've also got another picture here where, again, having lifted up that translucent paper, these are my hands in the picture, you can see my fingers right through the paper on that upper right side, and there is light coming through and illuminating the photograph, which changes the way that it looks, whether it's flat in the folder or when you lift it, it shifts because you get light coming through the photograph from behind. So one of the very important pictures in that Parmelian prints portfolio that Adams does with Bender's help is this photograph, Monolith, Face of Half Dome. And you have just a stunning print of this in the exhibition upstairs that's on loan by Carolyn Burnett. And it's a very early print. Ansel Adams has labeled it with its title right under the image, which you can see upstairs. And this picture, unlike most of the works that were in the Parmelian prints, was very significant to Adams. He reprinted it many times throughout the course of his career, which was unusual. Many of the pictures he made in the 20s, he didn't continue to reproduce. And to underscore that, I did an exhibition in 2010, and forgive me for the reflections in that largest framed object, but what you're looking at here is 5 different prints of Monolith, Face of Half Dome made by Ansel Adams over the course of his career. So all the way on the left, you're looking at a 1927 print, so that's from the same year as the negative was made. Next to it, that bright, glowing picture is the same print with light from behind so that you can see that effect of lifting it up out of its folder. The print next to that is an enlargement on this very warm, textured paper that Adams later eschewed and said, I don't know what I was thinking printing this on such a weird paper. Then next to it is a print from the 1940s, a contact print on a glossy gelatin silver black and white paper. And then obviously all the way to the right is this massive enlargement of it that he made in 1963 for his exhibition Eloquent Light, which he did with Nancy Newhall. So you can see that this is an image that was so important to him, and he really continued to interpret and reinterpret it over the course of his photographic career. The photograph, Monolith, Face of Half Dome, was made from this ledge right here, and this is called the diving board. It looks terrifying to me, but apparently you can hike there from the valley floor, which Adams had done in 1920. And when he did it in 1920, he thought, this is the perfect place from which to make a picture of Half Dome. Half Dome is a 5,000-foot piece of rock in Yosemite Valley. Adams felt that it was one of the most grand rock formations in the world. Of course, Yosemite was near and dear to his heart, so he would have that kind of connection to something like Half Dome. So he made the picture in 1927 in April. He hiked to the diving board with his fiancée, Virginia Best, who herself was an accomplished hiker and wilderness woman, and then two friends, Cedric Wright and Arnold Williams, who worked for the Yosemite Park and Curry Company. So they hike up there in 1927, and Adams took with him 12 glass plates on this hike. And by the time they got to the top and he was ready to photograph Half Dome, he'd used 10 of the 12 glass plates. So he had 2 left. And for the 11th exposure of the day, he used a yellow filter, and he took a photograph of Half Dome. And he realized that the negative was not going to produce an image that reflected the emotional experience he was having there, standing, parallel to Half Dome. And so he talks about this as being his first true visualization. And I'm going to read you just a very short passage where he talks about it in his autobiography. So now we're on the 12th of 12 glass plates that he has for the day. As I replaced the slide, I began to think about how the print was to appear and if it would transmit any of the feeling of the monumental shape before me in terms of its expressive emotional quality. I began to see in my mind's eye the finished print I desired, the brooding cliff with a dark sky and the sharp rendition of distant, snowy Tenaya Peak. I realized that only a deep red filter would give me anything approaching the effect I felt emotionally. He switched filters to a dark red Raton number 29 and made another exposure with the final plate. And again, I'm quoting. I released the shutter. I felt I had accomplished something, but did not realize its significance until I developed the plate that evening. I had achieved my first true visualization. I had been able to realize a desired image, not the way the subject appeared in reality, but how it felt to me and how it must appear in the finished print. So this becomes a very significant image for Adams over the course of his career, and really is a standout in that Parmelian Prints portfolio. So again, I make sure you take a good look at it upstairs. So the next chapter in the book is about the Taos Pueblo, and I wanted to talk about this both because it's local to you all, but it's also one of the first times that Adams begins to create a product that really shows he understands who his audience is. He began to come to northern New Mexico in 1927, the spring of 1927, with Albert Bender, his patron, who needed someone to chauffeur him to northern New Mexico, and Adams knew how to drive. So Adams came with Albert Bender and was immediately entranced by northern New Mexico. I don't have to tell any of you why that would be. You've all chosen this place too. And Adams began to realize that there weren't as many photographers here as he was competing with in the San Francisco Bay Area. And that gave him some ideas about how he might be able to leverage making pictures here into some commercial opportunities. He made photographs at some of the pueblos and began to think about maybe doing a portfolio like he had done for the Parmelian Prints. And then he came upon the idea of doing a book, a luxe edition of a book that would be illustrated with his photographs. And he uses his knowledge of the book collecting community in the San Francisco Bay Area, of which he was a member. He belonged to the Book Club of California and the Roxburgh Club. And he knew his fellow book collectors loved a special book, something that was really exceptional, highly collectible. So he ended up partnering with Mary Austin. And this is the first page of her text from the book. It's in letterpress type and is a special essay that she wrote just for this book. And then Adams knew that if he could do something special with the photographs, it would make his book very desirable to these book collectors. So what he did was give the paper that they were going to use to bind the book to his friend and colleague William Dassenville, a photographer in San Francisco, who then coated the pages with photographic emulsion. Adams printed the 12 images for Taos Pueblo right onto the pages for the book, and then those photographs were bound right into the book itself. That made it a very rare and collectible object, and he was able to be very successful with it. It's interesting because Adams was such a prolific correspondent. I imagined that I would be able to find in the correspondence Adams's attitudes about the American Indian people he was photographing, because Mary Austin was an Indian activist, and that was part of why he wanted her to write for the book. But Adams, interestingly, in the correspondence, doesn't talk about the Indian people or his relationship to them or how he feels about them. He is really focused on the marketing, the production, the technical aspects of the book. And there's this great pair of letters in one of the pages comes from the CCP, one comes from the Huntington Library, where the Mary Austin archive is. And this is Adams writing to Austin about pricing the book and her writing back. And I'm going to read just a short portion of the letter. So we're picking up here. Adams says, I have been carefully weighing in my mind the number of copies to be made and the price to charge. The practical phase of the venture is too serious to be secondary. Were I to be stuck and taken less than the book cost, it would be rather disastrous to our affairs. Here is the comparative specifications on the two propositions regarding the book. 1, 250 copies at $50 a copy will require the sale of 90 copies to meet the material cost of the edition. 2, 100 copies at $75 a copy will require the sale of 45 copies to meet the material cost of the edition. End quote. So to these suggestions, Austin replies in her letter right at the top, 250 copies of a book at $50 a copy seems to me to be beyond belief, and 100 copies at $75 a copy leaves me gasping. So Adams actually ends up recommending the latter, the more expensive book in the smaller edition, and he feels it will be the safer course of action. So that's what they ended up doing. They sold out the entire edition of 108 books. This is 1930, that's the beginning of the Great Depression. The $75 book would be about $1,100 in today's dollars, so to give you a sense of just how pricey a product this was. But it shows that Adams is beginning to understand how to think about that audience and create a product that's going to appeal to them. Now, I think in many ways, the biggest contribution of my book to Adams' scholarship is this chapter where I talk about his work for the Yosemite Park and Curry Company. So we've seen Adams make pictorialist pictures like the Taos Pueblo book. We've now are going to watch him learn about the marketing of photographic images. So Adams begins to work for the Yosemite Park and Curry Company, which is the primary concession in Yosemite National Park in the late 1920s. He's hired, because he's there in the park each year, to make photographs to help the Yosemite Park and Curry Company advertise tourism in the valley. They control the hotels, they control the dining rooms, they control the lodge, they control the campsites, they control the provisions. So the more they can increase tourism, the more money they make. And so they're interested especially in increasing tourism during the winter, because if you imagine that you have a finite number of hotel rooms, and they're all full in the summer, but they're not full in the winter, you can either make more money by building more hotel rooms so that you can bring more people in the summer, or you can get more people to come in the winter when you have vacant rooms. So that was their tactic. So they hired Ansel Adams to make pictures that would help them promote tourism in the valley, including this picture of golfing at Wawona, or this picture of ice skating on an ice rink that was right there below Half Dome. And Adams really got into this project. He was reporting directly to the marketing department of the Yosemite Park and Curry Company, so he was taking instruction from them about what kind of images they wanted him to produce. And they were interested in pictures like this that balanced the completely unique natural features of the place with the kinds of activities that might attract a tourist who would otherwise go to Lake Placid or might go to Salt Lake City. But you could come to Yosemite and get this natural element as well. The pictures were used in lots of different ways. Here we're seeing one of Adams's pictures on the cover of the Iwani Menu, dining room menu. They printed souvenir menus for each meal so that you could have your menu with that day's offerings and an Ansel Adams image on the cover. Inside there was a little description of the image that was helping to promote tourism. And then you would take this home as a souvenir. I buy these off of eBay. You all can go home tonight and look them up. They're still for sale. You can have them in your very own collection. They're really charming objects. Some of Adams's pictures were being used in newspapers, so the marketing department would send Adams's pictures to the newspapers to try and get them to run stories about Yosemite. This, of course, still happens. We send press releases to newspapers, and then maybe they use that to write a story. So here, it is supposed to be about how there's been so much snow melt that the waterfalls in Yosemite are at record levels. And you can see there on the right that it says that all the photographs are by Ansel Adams. So these are things he made for Yosemite Park and Curry Company, and then they were printed in the San Francisco Chronicle. The pictures were also used for postcards. So here I'm showing you that this image that appeared in the newspaper, Adams then also used to create a photographic postcard. These are called real photo postcards, and these two can be found on eBay. No one on eBay knows that they're by Ansel Adams because they're not marked as being by Ansel Adams, but any of these postcards that have that kind of printing with that type style are all by Ansel Adams. So he's making these postcards. That is how we came to the design of the cover of the book. These postcards are such a neat and rare part of Adams's early history that we decided to recreate that El Capitan postcard on the cover of the book. It's got a different gloss, and it's kind of set in on the cover to make it seem like there's a postcard right there. And Adams was making lots of these pictures for the Yosemite Park and Curry Company to promote the place, but to encourage people to come take advantage of the tourist opportunities. And Adams was encouraged to really think about how he could make photographs that the average American middle-class tourist would understand this message about the value of tourism in Yosemite. So he's taking his photographic skills, he's got beautiful compositions, he's got great technique. Now he's learning about how to literally build a message into that photograph so that when people look at the photograph, they understand what the message is. And so what happens then is Adams then in 1941 gets invited by this person, the Secretary of Interior, to come and make photographs for the interior building. And I think this must have been such an exciting moment in Adams's life to be asked by the federal government to make photographs of the national parks, which he loved, that were going to be made into mural-sized photographs and displayed in the nation's capital. I mean, just a very exciting proposition. They wanted Adams to make a single print. He talked them into an ongoing project where he could photograph in the national parks all over the West. And in this picture, we're seeing the Japanese-style screen here. This is an Ansel Adams screen in Harold Ickes' office in Washington, D.C. And part of how Ickes knew Adams and had this idea for Adams to do murals for the interior building. And so on that project, Adams makes pictures like the one we discussed at the top of the lecture, this picture of the Tetons, or pictures like these in Canyon de Chelly, or at Lone Pine in the eastern part of California, or at Manzanar, which is also in that eastern part of California on the other side of Yosemite. So he's taking what he learned from working for Yosemite Park and Curry Company and then infusing those learnings into his own artistic photography so that now he's got the technique, but he's also got this concept of building a message, his message, into the photographs that he's making. Okay, now we're going to read about another of our very favorite Ansel Adams photographs. We're going to talk about Moonrise. And I should recommend, there's a pairing of Moonrise prints upstairs It's such a great opportunity to get to see two prints and see the differences between them. They're different size prints, but there's all kinds of subtle nuances in the way that he made each of the prints. It's a really wonderful example, so make sure you do that upstairs as well. So I'll do this and then we'll take questions. Moonrise Hernandez, New Mexico, 1941. By far, Adams's most famous photograph is Moonrise Hernandez, New Mexico. Oft told, the story of its making is one of photographic legend. The creation of the Moonrise negative happened on a trip when he was accompanied by his son Michael and his friend Cedric Wright. And that's what we're seeing here on the screen. That's Michael grinning up at his dad, Cedric Wright in the middle, and Ansel Adams standing. And they're packing the car with all of the equipment that they're going to take on this extended road trip. They had been making photographs without much success in the Chama River Valley, near Georgia O'Keeffe's Ghost Ranch in northern New Mexico. Driving back to Santa Fe, Adams hastily responded to what he saw before him, quote, "In the east, the moon was rising over distant clouds and snow peaks, and in the west, the late afternoon sun glanced over a south-flowing cloud bank and blazed a brilliant white upon the crosses in the church cemetery," end quote. With the sun setting, he knew he had to act fast. Swerving his station wagon to the side of the road, he commanded his son and Wright to help him set up his 8 by 10-inch view camera. Tripod, camera body, lens board, lens, dark cloth, loaded film holder, and light meter had to be pulled out and assembled before he could frame and focus the view, made all the more urgent by the rapid descent of the November sun. In the frantic hustle, the light meter could not be found. Evaluating the scene before him, Adams miraculously remembered the luminance of the full moon, 250 candles per square foot, and was able to approximate an exposure for the scene. He released the shutter and captured the clouds, moon, and mountains beyond the little town of Hernandez. Before he could make a second backup negative, the sun dipped below the horizon and the opportunity was gone. With that single negative, Adams preserved a view that has become a photographic icon. The image at its core exhibits many of his mature stylistic elements. Adams filled the frame with a vast expanse of sky, the moon hovering above a bank of horizontally striated clouds and a long, low chain of mountains. He placed the chapel and cross-filled graveyard of Hernandez in the middle ground, bounded by a shrub-filled plain. The picture features a panoramic sweep of landscape and compellingly asserts that this perspective, with its precise arrangement of human edifice within a monumental and impressive environment, is the critical viewpoint for observing the scene. The drama comes, in part, from the relative scale of the elements. The endless quality of the sky reminds viewers of how small and seemingly insignificant we are in the expanse of the universe. All of these visual qualities serve to inspire in the viewer a sense of awe in the face of a spectacular and unique visual experience, an appreciation for the natural scene, and a feeling of amazement. Unlike the mountain pictures of the late 1920s and 30s, found in his Parmelian Prints portfolio or his Sierra Club album, Moonrise clearly conveys Adams's intensity of experience, his message about the transcendental possibilities for people when they are immersed in nature, and his deep appreciation for the American landscape. This slide compares his final print to his proof print. The proof print on the right is a straight or unaltered printing from the negative with no darkroom work, such as dodging or burning, that allows the manipulation of exposure to select areas of the print. As such, it affords a view of Hernandez that is much closer to the one Adams originally observed, albeit in black and white. From this view of the landscape, he envisioned, or to use his parlance, visualized, the finished artwork of Moonrise Hernandez, New Mexico. Moonrise existed only in his imagination. He photographed a raw scene that he could transform in the darkroom into a symbol that would convey how he felt under a vast and beautiful New Mexico sky. By altering the relationship of the sky and the graveyard of the Hernandez Chapel to create a dark expanse over a shimmering village burial ground, Adams created from the raw material of the landscape an emotionally engaging image, one that borders on magic or mysticism. On that November day, Adams drew on more than 2 decades of wilderness exploration and photographic experience to create what would become his masterpiece. Deep and repeated contemplation had etched in him the value and meaning of immersing oneself in nature. Equally ingrained were lessons about making photographs that effectively convey an essential idea. Adams's early years had readied him for the scene he discovered along the highway as the sun set over northern New Mexico. Thank you. In her labels, Kate references other research that I've done about that moonrise picture, and in particular talks about the fact that we have other photographs that Adams made of the moonrise of the chapel that we see there in Hernandez. When he was with Georgia O'Keeffe in 1937, he actually walked all the way around the chapel, and it looks like he was there on 2 separate days because some of the pictures have this clear blue sky and some have a cloudy sky. So he knew Hernandez very well. So that notion that it was this like swerving off the road, quick, let's make a picture, doesn't quite square with the information. And it was Alan Ross who first mentioned to me that Adams liked the phrase, chance favors the prepared mind, and that that it seemed unlikely that Adams truly discovered this scene for the very first time the day he made the picture. So it's a kind of collective conclusion that we've come to about Adams probably knowing about Hernandez as he saw the scene and the moon rising and was able to then make that very famous picture. So I'd be happy to take questions if anyone has one. Yes, sir. Oh, did Ansel Adams ever use sandwich negatives? I can't think of a time that he did. There may be a errant double exposure, but actually in those early Parmelian print pictures, he's using orthochromatic emulsions, which don't see blue light very well, so you get those blank skies. They kind of look like 19th century pictures. Even though panchromatic emulsions were available, but he was choosing to use the orthochromatic, so that would have been a place where we might have seen him do that, and he didn't. So no, I don't believe that there's an example of him sandwiching negatives, not even when he's experimenting. Yeah. Yes?
Did he coat his own glass plates?
He didn't. He was buying commercially prepared plates. Yeah. And it's a little curious why he, in the 1920s, even into the late 1920s, would be using glass plates, because there's certainly commercially available sheet film, and he's taking it into the mountains, so he's doing something that's excessively difficult under those conditions. But the conservator at the CCP speculated that given that he was going to be taking the plates, the negatives, through lots of different temperatures and humidities, maybe he was worried about sheet film warping and kind of coming out of a flat plane, whereas the glass is going to stay perfectly rigid because it's glass. And so he was choosing the glass, even though it was much harder and more cumbersome, because it was going to produce a more excellent print, ultimately. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, there's a question there. Did he do photographic studies? He did. He used 35 millimeter cameras as well. So he actually worked with all kinds of different size cameras and even did panoramic pictures in color when he was working for Kodak. They were made into these huge, now I'm forgetting the name of them. They were these huge color transparencies in Grand Central Station that were advertising Kodak Company. So he did, and in fact, experimented with Polaroid, both the Polaroid prints and the Polaroid pull-apart positive-negative film. So he did a lot of experimentation and work with lots of different cameras over the course of his career. He loved the technical aspects and loved trying out new things, photographed in color and black and white, all kinds of different film. Yes?
Similarly, obviously, landscape and nature photography, you saw the amazing portraits that he did tonight in the show. Did he do any figure studies? He obviously was around Bernard and Cunningham.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question is about whether or not Ansel Adams did any figure studies. We used to joke when we were working on the Ansel Adams show for the Museum of Fine Arts that we were going to discover the lost nudes of Ansel Adams. There is no such thing. There are no lost nudes by Ansel Adams. I've been through so much of his material, and it's not something he did. There are some pictures that are a little cheesecakey in the work that he did for Yosemite Park and Curry Company, right? It's sometimes nice to have a model in short shorts, out at the Merced River frolicking. So there are some pictures like that. But no, he really didn't ever do any figure studies. And Kate makes a great point about the portraits in this exhibition here, that he really has this very group F64 style of portraiture, which if you're the subject, it's not always the most flattering way to be photographed with strong sunlight. I'm sure we all have had pictures of ourselves where there's a little too much light, the photographer's a little too close, we're seeing a little too many wrinkles, but when you look at the pictures upstairs, that's precisely what he's doing. He's really thinking about the surface textures of the person and photographing them kind of like he's photographing that pine cone in the eucalyptus leaves or the way he's photographing the wooden stump. So it's a funny approach, but it's a very group F64 way to make a portrait. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for being such a terrific audience, and I hope you enjoy the show and come back and see it because they're such special prints. Thank you so much.